So let me start by making an observation. There are 70 institutions in the world today that exist today as a structural matter in exactly the same form they existed 500 years ago. 70. I'm sorry, strike that. I already made a mistake. There are 85 such organizations. You could name some. 70, though, are universities. 70 to 85. And you can add the Parliament, you could add the Vatican, you could add 8 cantons in Switzerland. Okay? That's 10 of the other 15. But the key point I want to make is that 70 of the 85 are universities. None in my country, of course. The oldest in my country only makes it about 2/3 of the way there. Several in the UK. At least what's presently the UK. You lose a few if you lose Scotland, right? So that should tell us something, that there's a tremendous strength in whatever it is a university is. I mean, there should be, if you think about it. It's the institutionalization of one of the great gifts that we humans have, and that is thought. That's what universities do, is thought. And this is the way we organize the institutions of creating new thoughts and transmitting the thoughts that exist, of testing the old ideas, even as we create the new. But there's this stability that, and a conservatism, even as we provide advance in thinking. So adaptation goes along with being a university, but it's an adaptation built on a deep foundation of strength. And if you think about it, universities have always operated beyond sovereignty. Sovereignty is a meaningless concept, even though it's fair to say in some ways that universities, until relatively recently, viewed themselves as training the national elites, the very best universities. But those who populated the university paid little attention in their disciplines to sovereignty. So mathematics talks to mathematics around the world. Philosophers talk to philosophers around the world. Not to say there are no limitations of space or time, but we've never stopped our conversations at the kind of artificial boundaries of sovereignty. All right, so that's the university. Now, what about globalization? The first version of globalization is one I get off the table very quickly. Okay, it's very much in the foreground these days, and that is economic globalization. So let's just stipulate in this group that economic globalization is a powerful force, but it's a very, very small part of the picture that is globalization. There is, I think, a kind of twofold trend that captures globalization much more broadly. The first is that the world is miniaturizing. The world's getting tiny. Barriers of space and time are becoming less and less. We're all in each other's lives. Sometimes quite explicitly, sometimes obviously, but somehow or another we're in each other's lives. And no matter where we are, even in the most remote areas of the world, if nothing else, climate change is something that is in everybody's life. But you just can take example after example after example. And the fact of the matter is that we're now at a point where gating strategies, the the gated suburban community with the security guards and the buzzing in, or if you want to, building walls, along southern or northern borders, whatever you want to do, right? I mean, I was remarkable to see in the madness of the American presidential election a show that featured one of the key border crossings between Mexico and the United States, which was a tunnel under a wall right there in southern Texas, into a house that had been rented, that the immigration, or maybe even a plane that flew over the wall, or maybe even someone that came in on a tourist visa that stayed. I mean, so these gating strategies aren't going to prevent people from being in our lives anymore. The world has miniatured, and it is a fact of existence that we are all going to be in each other's lives, and fairly powerfully. So now, the part of the question is, at this moment, and so I have a PhD in religion and I have a doctorate in law. So I have these two doctorates, neither of which can give you mathematical answers. Okay, my life has been about taking exams where the first two words could always be, it depends. Looking at this picture in the fullness of time, the way a student of law and religion does, counting in centuries, not months, we're at a pretty important inflection point, because there are two reactions that we can have, two very different reactions that we can have to this miniaturization of the world. And one is fear. Fear. So I'm afraid of that which is unfamiliar to me, that which is different from me, and a kind of nativism that grows out of that fear. And the other, and of course there's a spectrum, but the other end of the spectrum would be embrace. Embrace. Actual welcoming that new way of being in the world, that new way of looking at the world, that new way of looking at me. Universities have always been on the side of embrace. Right? Universities have always been about understanding and building bridges to the new. So that's worth noting, I think. There's a word that theologians in my tradition use to describe this embrace. It's a word that was taught to us in the 1960s by a great pope. I'm a Catholic, okay, and the great Pope John the 23rd taught us the word ecumenism, ecumenical. The wonder of looking at life not through the one window you're given at birth, but through the many windows of the mansion, and how you could understand yourself and understand. This is not a relativism. This is not giving up your space, but understanding, in the great poet Burns's words, how others see us is in itself elucidating. And then truly seeing the world through their eyes is another. So that ecumenism, that could be the mission of universities as they build together the world that comes. How does a university embrace this ecumenical role? First, I would say, if you embrace it, and in the interest of full disclosure, NYU has embraced it more aggressively than any other institution in the world. That's not President Emeritus talk. That's, if you think it's a good idea, then you think that's great. If you think it's a bad idea, you think it's horrible. But the fact of the matter is, we're all in. We looked out at the world. We saw this possibility. We saw what New York was. Now, most of you probably have not been to the NYU, quote, campus, close quote, in New York. Any of you that claims to have been to the NYU, quote, campus, close quote, in New York is a fraud because there is no NYU campus in New York. We have no campus. We have buildings in New York. In fact, we're the second largest owner of property other than the government in New York. We have about 240 buildings. They are spread throughout the city, largely located in Greenwich Village, but we don't have a single blade of grass on campus. We don't have a single spot to which you can retreat. We don't have a single gate. We are in and of the city. Okay? If you want retreat from the city, you go to Columbia. And you get into that gated community with the wonderful blades of grass, and you lie there and look up at the sun. There's no place to lie down on our campus, unless you want to lie down on the floor of the library or in a classroom. Okay? And we are packed in. Humanity and humanity's life, in each other's lives. We're just all, it's not quite as bad as a subway car in New York at rush hour, but it's tight. Okay? But we looked and we saw, wait a minute. This place, New York, is the first city in the world that has an active neighborhood for every country in the world. It's the first city in the world that can say, in our public schools, there is a child that was born in every country in the world. Many of them, as a matter of fact. So you can taste the food or hear the prayers or the music or the language of any country in the world by getting on the subway in New York. And the interesting thing is you go out to those neighborhoods and you say to people, where are you from? And they'll say, New York. Now, that may be Irish New Yorkers like me, or Russian New Yorkers like my bride, but they're New Yorkers. They're a community of communities, interlocking, creating a whole that's greater than some of the parts. So we saw that, and we understood that since we weren't a gated community, embracing this ecumenical agenda was the natural thing for us to do. So we said, let's do it. So first of all, we started saying to students, if you come here, we'll give you the kind of education places like Southampton or NYU should give you, with the very best of the faculty we can attract, among the best in the world, Nobel laureates, Pulitzer Prize winners, and so forth. We'll take a second seat to none in that regard. But we're going to give you a second education in the ecumenical skills of the second axial age, where you learn to do the bridging and the tunneling in the embrace of those that are different from you. And you wonder what's behind those eyes and under that wonderful hair. And how is she seeing me? And what mysteries does she behold inside? And a genuine dialogic dialogue, not just dialogue where you talk to each other, but where you really try to get in the other person's place to understand your own. So we're going to give you that skill as well. And then when you get used to it, and we'll do it, it has to run through everything. So in our dorms, for example, we're a residential school. So we said, let's start off with little finger exercises. Let's create what we call exploration floors. So what's an exploration floor? Okay, so I'm interested in Scrabble. I'm passionate about Scrabble. Okay, fine. You can be on a floor or a couple floors in the dorms of Scrabble players. And then 2 floors above are a floor or 2 floors of crossword puzzle people. And so forth and so on. And then shame on you if you stick only with the Scrabble people. Right? We would never do an ethnic or racial floor. Okay, you start off with simple, bridging and tunneling. And before you know it, the Scrabble players are even hanging around with the jazz players. And the jazz are playing around with the opera, and so forth and so on. So now you're getting used to that. Okay, now go over to the front of the library on Saturday or Sunday and get on a bus. And where does the bus go? To a neighborhood. And there's an old timer in a restaurant from Lithuania who tells you about Lithuania and plays some Lithuanian music and so forth. So now if you do that every Saturday and every Sunday for your 4 years, you'll see virtually the entire world. But taking you to Chinatown is one thing. Now we want you to study away. This is now 2.0. We've used maybe 3.0. 1.0 is the internal to the university, 2.0 is the city, 3.0. Now we're out and we're going to send you to the places. So we created 12 study away sites on 6 continents. Full NYU, and the key word here is integration. Each of them owned by the units and departments of NYU. So if you're an engineering student, maybe you can't go to all 12, but there'll be courses that you can take in engineering at 3 or 4 of the 12. Or if you're pre-med, or if you're in the film school, or whatever. Okay, there's enough out there because the departments have owned it, which ensures its quality and articulates back into the major. So that was 3.0. And then 4.0 was we looked at this map, and we were beyond being Eurocentric. We were in Shanghai with a study away site. We were in Sydney. We were in Tel Aviv. We were in Accra. We were in Buenos Aires. We weren't in the Arab and Muslim world. How could you be the ecumenical university and not be in the Arab and Muslim world? And that was when we went to Abu Dhabi with the thought of opening a study away site, and they raised the stakes. And they said, no, we've heard about these idea capitals you talk about. We want to be the idea capital in the Gulf. And if you will partner with us to create that, we will create a full university here at the highest level in the world. And not just for our local population, but for the vision of this community coming together literally from around the world. Literally from around the world. So we started that now. It's 8 years ago. We just took in our 8th class. And it's growing. It's a fraction of Southampton, but it'll be 2,000 undergraduates and 1,000 doctoral students. We've just passed 1,000 because we're metering up slowly, not because we don't have the quality applications, but because we're trying to inculcate deeply the values of ecumenism. So with about now 1,400 students on campus, there are 124 countries represented. And the largest group is 15%, 1-5, the largest group. And that group is the American group. Less than 5% come from a 200-mile radius around Abu Dhabi. So they're not local students, although there's about 5% from the Emirates. And they get along. And they have graduated. We've now had 3 graduating classes, and they're in the best graduate and professional programs in the world. One index for an American school is a Rhodes Scholarship at Oxford. With less than 1,000 graduates from NYU Abu Dhabi, we have 7 Rhodes Scholars. We haven't had 7 Rhodes Scholars from NYU New York in its history. And then from that developed NYU Shanghai. The Chinese government came to us and said, we want to do the same thing in Shanghai that you did in Abu Dhabi. And we're fully supported there too by the government. Although the difference there is half the students are Chinese. Although, and there are some Chinese students in the room, I'm sure you know what the Gaokao exam is. You can only apply to NYU Shanghai. Apply if you're in the top 1% on the Gaokao. We're more selective than the C9. And then you go through our 2-day interview process, just as you do in Abu Dhabi before you're admitted. So there are now this network, think the Italian Renaissance again, this network, you can enter any one of 3 doorways. You enter, it makes a difference where you enter, because in New York, 75% of your classmates are going to be American, and you're going to be in an American city. The Abu Dhabi's the other end of the spectrum. There is no dominant ethnic group either in the school or in the city, because only 15% of the people in the Emirates are citizens of the Emirates. But it's small and distilled, and you can't avoid anybody. And then in between is NYU Shanghai, where half the students are Chinese, and the other half come from around the world. And of course, day one, every Chinese student has a non-Chinese roommate. And then that's where you spend most of your time, but you then circulate through the system. This is done purely, solely, and for no other reason than the academic reason I gave you. Globalization, in my view, is not something you do to generate revenue. Because we come back to that cost minus subsidy equals tuition. High quality education needs that second element. The subsidy has to come from somewhere. We're able to do it in Abu Dhabi and in Shanghai because of tremendous subsidies from the governments there. We're able to do it in New York because of philanthropy and because of some subsidies from the American government. But you cannot run high quality education for a profit. It's not doable.